Good afternoon, everyone. At this point, I will call the committee to conduct an interim study of the requirements for reapportionment and redistricting in the state of Nevada to order. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the committee to conduct an interim study on requirements for reapportionment and redistricting. This is our fourth meeting of the 2019-20 interim. We thank everyone who has joined us today online, and we appreciate your participation, even if we can't see you in person. Members, as usual, we want to make sure that you mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Our committee analyst is going to call a roll today. So Mr. Stewart, would you go ahead with that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Michael Stewart. Calling roll today, Senator Cancella.
Here.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Here.
Senator Gansert.
Here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Here.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
And Chair Woodhouse.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. As you know, this study is meant to set the stage for our redistricting efforts this biennium. To all in attendance and those listening over the internet, we thank you for your interest and your participation in this important study. Before we begin, we do have a few housekeeping items to review for the benefit of the audience and those who are wishing to speak. Although we're meeting remotely, many of the procedures do remain the same. Meeting materials can be accessed on the committee's webpage. Anyone who would like to receive electronic notification and access to the committee's agendas, minutes, or final report can sign up on the Nevada Legislature's website. And we will have two periods of public comment today, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end of the meeting. Our public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker and will be taken over the telephone. There are 4 ways to provide public comment, all of which are listed on the agenda. Those include calling 669-900-6833 and then entering the meeting ID, which is 927-0242-6353, followed by the pound sign. Or you may email your comments to redistricting@lcb.state.nv.us, or you may mail your comments directly to the Research Division at 401 South Carson Street in Carson City, Nevada, 89701. Or you may fax your comments to 775-684-6600. As always, this meeting will be recorded and available on the legislature's website and is also available for live and archive viewing on the Nevada Legislature's new YouTube channel. For an overview, just a couple of things. While our public commenters are being connected, I'd like to say a few words about our work this interim. The genesis of this interim study is Senate Joint Resolution 9 of the 2019 legislative session. And this study is held every 10 years in advance of the redistricting session to help us prepare for the redistricting exercise. Because of the pandemic and 2 special sessions this summer, our meeting opportunities were limited. And we do thank the Legislative Commission that gave this committee the opportunity to meet beyond our June 20th, 2020 meeting deadline so that we could continue our business this fall. Today, we are going to hear from the Census Bureau and how they have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. They recently concluded the enumeration phase and will update us on their response rates and what we can expect moving forward. We will also hear about Nevada's Complete Count Committee and its efforts to promote the census this past year. And we will also receive an update on how the 2019 legislative appropriation was used in the census outreach. Also on our agenda today is an overview of public participation practices and options for Nevada and a review from legislative staff in Utah regarding their public participation practices in reapportionment and redistricting. Our LCB redistricting staff will update us on the committee, will update the committee on various GIS matters, and will discuss the use of election data in the redistricting process, and will recommend the selection of certain election information for use in Nevada's GIS data set. Finally, we will consider recommendations to expand the maximum number of voters permitted in election precincts and consider recommendations for joint standing rules for the 2021 legislative exercise. Before we begin with public comment, I would like to thank all of our presenters who have so graciously agreed to participate virtually, and to our incredible broadcast and production services staff who have worked tirelessly to make sure that everyone is connected in this virtual setting. Before we go on to our agenda item number 2, which is public comment, I want to announce to the committee that we're going to take some of our agenda items today out of order. So if you want to grab a pen, pencil, after agenda item number 3, we will hear item 6, followed by 8, 9, and 10. And then we are going back to 4 and 5, and we will finish with number 11. Would anyone like me to repeat that? Okay, I don't hear anything, so everyone's got it. Thank you. So now we're going to open to the first period of public comment. Each speaker, as I indicated earlier, will have 3 minutes, and we encourage members of the public to submit their written testimony via one of the methods listed on the agenda. So to our BPS staff, would you please add the first caller with public comment into our meeting?
Thank you,
very
Madam
much.
Chair. The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Very good, thank you. So with that, we'll move to agenda item number 3, which is approval of the minutes for the meeting of August 27th, 2020. Members, are there any questions on those minutes? Okay, I do not hear any, so I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes that were from the meeting held on August 27th. Do we have a motion? We have a motion to approve from Speaker Frierson, second from?
Second.
Second from, I didn't catch who that was.
Senator Cannizzaro, second.
Very good, thank you. So the motion has been made by Speaker Frierson, seconded by Senator Cannizzaro. And since we are, first of all, any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Stewart, we will have you call the roll. And we ask that committee members respond with a yes or no. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cancella.
Yes.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Yes.
Senator Gansert.
Yes.
Senator Goycochea.
Yes.
Senator Woodhouse.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Yes.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Yes.
And Assemblyman Watts.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And that motion has passed. So our next agenda item will be item number 6. And this is the item to discussion of public participation options and considerations for reapportionment and redistricting in Nevada, and a review of public participation activities in the state of Utah and other states. So I believe Mr. Stewart will start with a brief review of general practices, and then we also have Jerry Howe, who is the Strategic Initiatives Manager with Utah's legislative staff, the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel, and he will be presenting participation practices there in Utah. And then finally, Haley Prohl, our LCB's GIS analyst in redistricting, will also highlight the capabilities of our system here. So we will go ahead, Mr. Stewart and your team, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Michael Stewart, LCB Research. I was just going to start by just briefly covering maybe just a few national trends. I did upload into the website for the committee an NCSL Legis brief that actually was provided to us at our last meeting in August, but it's very specific to public participation practices in other states as well. So I'll kind of just highlight some items and then talk a little bit about what Nevada has done in the past and also what's been included in our rules in the past. So beginning back in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, as you can imagine, the public played little role in redistricting. But in our 2000 cycle, more states did provide the opportunity for the public to play a larger role, up to and including creating maps for the legislature to consider. Now, by 2010, the role of the public became even more prominent. And looking into 2021, it's likely that many states, including Nevada, will have even more formal or informal opportunities for public participation. In fact, since 2010, legislation aimed at transparency and public input has been very common. And states are likely to find individuals and constituents groups actively seeking for an opportunity to have a say in the redistricting process, even if the final decision is made by the legislature. Some states carry out public hearings on what general concerns and values and the values that matter to which groups of people. And many states conduct hearings after they receive data from the Census Bureau and let residents comment on how district populations have changed over the decade. And in general, most states hold hearings both before and after drafting plans and after they're released to the public and finally approved. And this obviously is much like what we're doing right now with the interim study that we hold every 10 years prior to the redistricting session, as well as some of the required public hearings that I'll cover in the rules that we've had in the past, as well as the public hearings that the redistricting committees of the Nevada Legislature, which has been the Legislative Operations and Elections Committees, there's been opportunities during those hearings as well. Another opportunity that some states do are sort of like listening tours. Again, that's something that Nevada has done during redistricting sessions and also set forth in the rules. The requirement to have a public hearing in the northern part of the state, a southern part of the state, and the rural part of the state. And we've been doing that for the last at least 2, possibly 3 redistricting cycles. And of course, there's always public comment periods on our agendas that are managed pursuant to standard committee protocols. Many states have now created specific redistricting portals or email addresses to receive input from those who cannot appear in person. And Haley will kind of comment a little bit more about our capabilities for that based on the new software that was purchased or that has been approved to be purchased for the upcoming cycle. And so, of course, the biggest question I think is about the public input is how the public will be able to submit plans, and if so, when and how and that sort of thing. And again, that's dependent on our technology, and the technology these days is such that, frankly, many more people are able to sort of redistrict at home. And so that's something that the legislature will need to probably manage moving forward. As I mentioned, I did upload into the website what's called a Legis brief from the National Conference of State Legislatures. I won't go through it in great detail, but just to say that that document does highlight various states and what sort of public input they either require or do. This includes public map submissions, which states participate in public comment and offer public comment and testimony, provide public hearings and access, and various notice requirements. As I mentioned as well, Nevada has typically held in its standing or in its joint standing rules, public participation requirements. In 2011, this appeared in Joint Standing Rule 13.6 concerning public participation. And specifically, that rule says that the redistricting committees shall seek and encourage public participation in all aspects of redistricting and reapportionment activities, and seek the widest range of public input into the deliberations relating to those activities. It also provides that notices of all meetings of redistricting committees must be transmitted to any member of the public who so requests it without charge. So in this case, it would be folks who sign up to hear or to receive notices from committee hearings, basically. The rule goes on to say that all interested persons are encouraged to appear before the redistricting committees and provide their input regarding reapportionment and redistricting activities. And the redistricting committee shall afford a reasonable opportunity to any interested persons to present plans for redistricting or amendments to plans for redistricting, unless such plans demonstrably fail to meet minimally accepted criteria. Each of the redistricting committees shall fully utilize the available video conferencing capabilities that we have here in the state of Nevada and the legislature, and shall either jointly or separately hold at least one hearing in the southern portion of the state and at least one hearing in the rural portion of the state to allow residents throughout Nevada the opportunity to participate in deliberations relating to reapportionment and redistricting. And then finally, the Legislative Council Bureau shall make available to the public copies of the validated 2010 census database, and I'm sure that will be updated for the 2020 census database for the cost of reproducing only. And then the committee shall make available for review by the public copies of all maps prepared at the direction of the committee. So committee members, this was accomplished in 2011 and largely in 2001 as well through the public hearings that I mentioned by the Legislative Operations and Elections Committees. Also in 2011, if you were there, you remember that LCB staff was asked to present at a couple committee of the whole meetings as well. I was part of those presentations along with my colleague, Kathy Steinley. We did have hearings in Southern Nevada and in rural Nevada, specifically in Fallon. We also had public workstations set up both in the legislative building and also down at the Grant Sawyer State Office building in Las Vegas. And this committee authorized the purchase of additional hardware and software for public workstations, again, for this upcoming redistricting cycle. Both in 2001 and 2011, we had a public map room where hard copy maps were displayed of the various plans that were under consideration. And submitted maps were also shown on the website. And as you saw in an earlier meeting, our staff has updated the redistricting website, so it's quite robust. And I think the public will enjoy kind of poking through that and looking at all the various pieces of information and map submissions and that sort of thing that we get as we move through the process. And then finally, I would just say that the LCB has always made its staff available, not only to the legislators, but also to the public for any questions on the process relating to reapportionment and redistricting. And so I would imagine those procedures will still remain the same. And I think with that, I'll leave it open for any questions you may have before we kick it over to my colleague from Utah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Committee members, any questions for Mr. Stewart on his first presentation today?
I have one,
Please go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Senator
So
Gonzalez.
I know, thank you. So we've been talking about, and I know we had a discussion earlier about the public workstations and the public maps and how those would be available. Do we foresee if we are still in the midst of a pandemic where there's limited interaction, are we coming up with any ideas for how we would still be able to encourage and utilize public participation in the form of being able to submit maps or view maps if it is more difficult for the public to make it to a public workstation, or if we can't use a public workstation or view a public map?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael Stewart, for the record, to you and through you to Senator Cannizzaro. That's an excellent question. And as you know, the legislature is contemplating what the 2021 session will look like in all aspects of our deliberations. And to the extent that the committees and the public hearings that we have will be, and we don't know yet, but will be, let's say, virtual, we would be able to, extend that virtual, I think, comment feature and capability to anybody who's interested, much like we're doing today. The other thing that I would mention as well is, and I think Haley Prohl can maybe comment a little bit about this at the end of this particular agenda item, is the robustness now of not only our website, but also of the software itself, in order that allows the public to submit maps and various proposals along the way as we move through this process. Most of the vendors now have a sort of public input or public submission tool as part of their GIS suite of capabilities. So I do believe, and frankly, Senator, we'll probably have more people than ever, honestly, doing redistricting from their homes on their own sort of GIS sites. So I think the one thing that we'll have to look at as we get closer to session is just to make sure that any of those public map submissions do meet the certain criteria that will actually mesh with our GIS system. So that's kind of a long answer to say that, yeah, I think we should be able to accommodate the public through technology, much like we're doing today, and based on our redistricting software purchase that does allow for submissions a little bit more electronically, if that makes sense. So, thank you.
You good, Senator Cannizzaro? Any further questions?
Figuring out how to unmute myself. No, Madam Chair, thank you. And of course, always appreciate the ability of all of our amazing staff to find ways for us to be able to do that. I think it's really important and certainly will be important as part of this process. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members with questions for Mr. Stewart? Okay, I see none. So I think we'll go on to Mr. Howe from Utah, if you're ready. And I think, Mr. Stewart, you're going to do his screen sharing for us. Is that correct?
I think I'm just doing that for the Census Bureau. Mr.
okay.
Howe is going to be sharing from his end in Utah.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Howe, you may begin.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable members of the committee, my name is Jerry Howe, and I'm sharing my screen. Can everyone see it?
Yes, we have it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure of that before I proceeded. I've been asked today to discuss Utah's experience seeking public participation in redistricting. For context, this presentation contains 15 slides and it will take about 25 minutes or so. I'm pleased to take questions as they arise or when we're finished, just whatever is in your pleasure. I assume we can all agree that redistricting is one of the biggest headaches a legislature faces in any given decade. Knowing this, I think it's reasonable to ask why anyone would complicate the situation by inviting the public to draw redistricting plans. I mean by that redistricting is difficult and legislators and redistricting commissions don't need an added complication if public participation doesn't serve a purpose. In Utah, after the 2011 cycle, even the skeptics within the legislative environment were convinced that public participation improved Utah's redistricting result. It did not only appease demanding voters, but it also improved the outcome of our redistricting process in its entirety. And I'll talk more about that as we proceed. Let me acknowledge right off the bat that Utah walked out on a limb in 2011 and encouraged the public to draw redistricting maps using an online tool. This made it very easy for people. All they needed was an internet connection and they could draw maps. I realize that not every politician is comfortable with this approach, even and perhaps especially in today's political environment. Let me say up front that it's neither my purpose nor my intent to convince anyone to do things the Utah way. I'm here to explain how Utah did it, but I fully acknowledge that there are other processes that may accomplish one's objectives. The Utah Constitution provides that the Utah Legislature shall divide the state into congressional, legislative, and other districts. And even though a citizen's initiative was narrowly passed by the electorate in 2018 and was subsequently amended in the 2019 general session, the Utah Legislature will receive and consider proposed redistricting plans from the Independent Redistricting Commission. But as provided in this provision of the Utah Constitution, the legislature will ultimately decide what redistricting plans will be adopted. It's important to note, as I have, that Utah voters passed the initiative creating this Independent Redistricting Commission, and that it was amended to permit the legislature to implement its functions under the Utah Constitution. The proponents of the Redistricting Commission agreed to amend the state statutes governing the commission during the 2019 session. The amended language resolved some staffing conflicts, provided that the Independent Redistricting Commission is given ample opportunity to present its proposed plans in a public meeting of the legislature's Redistricting Committee, and it clarified that the commission is advisory. The Utah Redistricting Commission, the Redistricting Committee, in this next cycle and in past cycles, is comprised of about 20 legislators that are appointed by the president and the speaker. The Redistricting Committee will adopt principles and guidelines. They hold about 28 meetings, including 17 public hearings across the state. In my experience, redistricting is a little bit like a river where upstream communities are sometimes unaware of the effects their usage has on downstream communities. To illustrate, when the Utah Redistricting Committee visits different regions of the state in the 18 public hearings that they hold, every community makes its case for how it wants the new maps to be drawn. This kind of information is extremely valuable, but the difficulty is that requests made by different regions within a state are often mutually exclusive one with another. Redistricting is controversial because some city, some county, some community, some special interest, or some political party, some incumbent, or some future candidate will always be convinced that there's a better way, that there's a smarter way to draw the map. This is the paradox of redistricting. Although there is nearly an infinite number of ways to draw new redistricting maps, there isn't a single one that can be drawn to satisfy everyone. Notwithstanding, in the 2011 cycle, despite the inherent risk of being the first state to encourage and provide a simple, easy to understand format for the public to participate in drawing redistricting plans, our legislative leaders believed that public input had a potential upside. The potential upside was that people are more comfortable with a map when they participate in drawing it. And we believe that the more input we receive, the better our maps could be. Now, for the record, we knew that providing the public a way to draw maps was uncharted territory. And let's be honest, doing things that have never been done before can be scary. Although some people believe our decision was naive, some people within our own legislature, in fact, this decision ensured that every citizen who attempts to draw a complete redistricting plan walked away with an understanding of the redistricting process. Only after legislators and constituents have a common mutual understanding of the redistricting problem will the problem then be easier to discuss and to resolve. Even members of the media accepted invitations to draw complete redistricting plans. Utah's effort during the last cycle really did result in establishing mutual understanding. Some of the decisions that were made during that last redistricting cycle by our redistricting committee was that our districts were to be single member, they were going to be contiguous, and they were going to be compact. And then we made some decisions regarding acceptable deviations. Our congressional deviations were to be 0.1%. Our legislative deviations in the House and the Senate seats were to be plus or minus 3.5%, and our school board districts were going to be as well as 3.5% plus or minus. Now, those were our ground rules, and every state needs them. Utah really went out of its way to drive down the deviations. We did this because our general counsel advised that the lower our deviations were, the more difficult it would be for litigants to prevail if the plans were challenged. Our actual deviations, again, are listed here. The acceptable deviation for our congressional was 0.1%. Our actual deviation was 0.0001%. We drove our deviation in the congressional seats. We have 4 congressional seats, and they differed by 1 person. Excuse me, all 3 were the same number, except for 1 district had 1 person deviation. In our House, the actual deviation was 0.12%, the Senate was 0.0063%, and our school board was 0.0239%. To be clear, I'm not here to convince anyone to take this path by driving the deviations down this low. And although I think it was the right path for Utah, I have no idea how implementing public input would play out on this level in Nevada or anybody else's state. So please understand that I don't mind if you challenge our thinking here today. Still, the way I read the tea leaves, at least in Utah, is that the current public interest combined with advancements in technology will someday make it impossible for anyone, including legislatures, to prevent the public from drawing their own maps. Public participation is likely coming to a state near you, whether we're ready for it or not. Utah accepted this reality during the last cycle, and it wasn't as big and as bad and as ugly as some feared. Our actual deviations were much tighter than our stated goals, as I've already mentioned. I will say that we received some pushback from some members of our legislature, particularly in the House of Representatives, because these tight deviations required some very fine tuning that in every district that resulted in getting off of main roads and unnecessarily dividing some neighborhoods that could have remained intact if the deviations were just a little higher. Again, we drove the variations down to discourage litigation, and you'll have to decide for yourself if this is worth the effort. There are a few redistricting concepts that I would just like to touch on briefly. First thing is we found in Utah where a state starts drawing its first map for the House or for the Senate or for Congress, it really matters with respect to how that map develops and how it progresses. And protecting incumbents in the cores of districts is as important to legislators as any other principle. It's no longer sufficient to educate only legislators about these redistricting realities. If the public strongly desires to be part of the redistricting process, and if the public doesn't understand these redistricting principles, then they will inevitably engage in the process with unrealistic expectations, which, as we all know, breeds frustration. So during the last cycle, we didn't know what to expect when we provided a simple, easy to understand tool for the public to draw plans just by getting on their own internet. We contracted with ESRI to create an online tool. The tool met our expectations, which allowed any registered user to submit a plan. In the slides that follow, I'll discuss registered user statistics, but for now, plans submitted by the public were required to comply with the same redistricting principles as the legislature's plans, including that the plans were required to be complete. They were required to be statewide plans. Plans drawn for a single district or a particular region were not accepted in our state from the public. Plans had to be statewide. This was important to our legislative leaders for the reasons we discussed about the law of the river. Everyone who draws a plan needs to deal with the implications that are sent downstream. For the record, we knew that providing the public a way to draw maps was uncharted territory. The good news is that the public improved the redistricting process. We even experienced an unexpected bonus. We got a lot of improved public relations through the media, through lobbyists and others. Although our critics believe that seeking public input was naive, the decision ensured that every citizen who drew a complete redistricting plan walked away with the same frustrations and the same difficulties that we all experience when trying to accommodate all the input we receive. Allowing the public to experience the actual difficulty of drawing a complete plan was really a good thing in the state of Utah. Only after legislators and constituents have a common, mutually understanding of the redistricting problem can we sit down together and negotiate in good faith. Even members of the media accepted invitations in Utah to draw complete redistricting plans using our tool. Utah's effort during the last cycle really did result in establishing some mutual understanding. Public participation in redistricting will not change the fact that partisans in and out of the legislature will always want to use redistricting to maximize their advantage. I hope no one thinks that Utah believes that allowing public input will cause your strongest critics to respect your choices because they discovered all of a sudden that redistricting can be really hard, because they won't do that. However, if the public is permitted to draw maps, important constituencies on the left and the right learn this one fact, that the perfect statewide map can't be drawn to accommodate everyone's dream district. Even legislators need to learn on occasion, and even relearn with each cycle, that redistricting is not as simple as stitching together every House or Senate member's ideal district. So Utah is currently evaluating an RFP for redistricting software, and we've not made a decision as to what software we will use for the 2020 cycle. So I don't have anything to report to date about where we're going in the future. But during the 2010 cycle, staff drew maps with ArcGIS and Autobound, whereas the public tool was an ESRI web-based redistricting tool. And I would really encourage any legislature that's considering allowing the public to draw plans to use an internet-based system rather than hardware in certain locations. It's just so much more convenient for the public. It's easy to track, and the tools can be used to, as users register, you can keep track of everybody. And it also allows users to share maps one with another. So a group in southern Utah could work together with a group in central Utah to draw maps for that region. And they could put them out on the internet, and other people could build off of those maps and make comments about those maps to help them build and to grow local ideas into regional ones, even into statewide plans. And that's very easy to do on the internet, not so easy to do from a different location. So the ESRI tool permitted the public to create groups, to share, to modify plans prior to submission, and to submit public plans to the redistricting committee for discussion at public hearings. The easy thing for us using this tool on the internet was when the redistricting committee went on the road. It was real easy when people that were attending a public hearing had drawn maps. They could give us the name of the map. We could put the name of the map into our computer based on the internet, and we could bring up their map right there online. We could show it to everybody in the committee meeting. The people could take a clicker, they could walk through the map that they had drawn, we could show it on a big screen, and there could be a discussion about that map. So that was very convenient, and it was really nice for everybody to participate in that way. This is what our online tool looked like. We had you could take a peek at the state of Utah. These are our congressional districts. There were just 5 tabs across the top. They were quite easy to learn. The first one was a little tutorial. Then you could create your maps, you could review them, then you could share them with anybody that you wanted to, and then they could be submitted. So 5 tabs is all that the tool had. They could assist users to draw maps. Each tab had a ribbon of tools and information that was listed on it. So it was about as basic and as simple as it could be. And this is the statistics that we had with our online tool. First of all, we had over 1,000 registered users. With that, we had 323 plans submitted. Now that's 323 plans that drew the entire state of Utah for either congressional districts, for House and Senate districts, or for our state school board districts. One of the things that we had was that only 271 of these plans met all of the criteria. And we required everybody in the public that wanted to create a plan to follow the same criteria that the legislature had to follow when they were going to submit a plan. So that is that the plan had to be compact, it had to be a single member district, and the deviation requirements, we placed the same deviation requirements on the public as we did with the legislature. This saved a tremendous amount of time in public hearings, whereas if someone came to a redistricting committee meeting with a map that they had drawn that did not meet the standard deviation requirements, we didn't spend a lot of time with that plan because we couldn't pass it. It would be outside the scope of a legal plan from the beginning. So we'd ask them to redraw the plan to meet the criteria. And we published early what the criteria was and let people know what the expectations were. So what was interesting in our state is that 198 of the plans that met the criteria were about congressional plans. So we learned in the state of Utah, at least during the 2011 cycle, that most of the people that were participating on the ESRI tool were primarily interested in the congressional plans. Honestly, we expected more end users than we received. With just over 1,000 users and only 323 plans submitted, 271 of which, as I've noted, met the criteria. This means that 677 registered users experienced the headache that we talked about earlier. And although they took the time to become a registered user, they didn't submit a complete plan. Another 52 submitted a plan that did not meet the criteria. 729 registered users did not submit a plan at all, or if they did, the plan did not meet the established criteria. To the extent that people commented on the online plans, everyone knew what the critics and the advocates were thinking, because we created a blog that allowed people to comment on plans that were submitted. Even if the drafters of every plan wanted to present their plan at a public hearing, it isn't possible with 30 meetings to hear from 271 complete plans. Still, not every person who submitted a complete plan wanted to present the plan at a public meeting. If a member of the public came to the dais and asked staff to display a map that they named "I Married a Redistricting Guru," for example, it would only take a few minutes for us to display the map. So imagine this. These are some of the headlines that we received in the state of Utah as we worked through this citizen drawing ability. We think that public participation was successful. The first headline, lawmakers endorse citizen map for new school board boundaries. Another headline, lawmakers endorse Logan residents map for a school board boundary. Because what we learned is that one individual created a map for state school boards that really did come through as the best map available. And there were some in the legislature that wanted to change that map a little bit, or for political reasons. But at the end of the day, the legislature adopted this map that was drawn by a member of the public. To accommodate public comment, in 2010, the legislative leaders, we created a blog and we posted all redistricting plans, public and legislative, on this website. Public comment and analysis was encouraged on all the plans. And This was an afterthought for us. We believed in the beginning that it would be sufficient to allow people just to draw a map and then come to a public hearing and discuss the map. And as what we learned, to our surprise, is that people did not just want to draw a map. They wanted to comment on maps that were drawn by others. And there was an intense desire for that. We heard it in our committee hearings. And so we adjusted partway through our redistricting process to create a way for people to participate by making comments to other people's plans. So public participation was beneficial in the state of Utah. As I mentioned, it allowed the public to improve our plans. It significantly improved public relations, primarily with press coverage. Public participation reduced criticism from members of the public, which was really important to the legislature. And to our surprise, public participants were thoughtful and they were knowledgeable, and their input helped us create better maps than we could have created without them. And the one universal truth that we were able to teach really and learn for ourselves, that a single district drawn in isolation is really quite simple to do, but a complete statewide plan is really not so easy. And when everybody comes to understand that, then the negotiations between districts and between regions and what it takes to draw a complete statewide map, people were much more willing to come to the table and to compromise on issues that they would not have otherwise felt the need to compromise on. So with that, Madam Chair, I conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. So yes, committee members, questions, just shout out, let me know who you are, and we'll have Mr. Howe address your questions. Any questions? Go ahead. One thing I would say, Mr. Howe, is I really appreciated the things that you learned, especially regarding the public participation. That is very positive to have that kind of experience. So maybe we will have the same thing happen here in Nevada. That would be great.
I hope you do.
Thank you. Questions from committee members?
Sure, Madam Chair, if I may just briefly, and
Go ahead.
I'll add a couple of different points, but my question is really more of a practical one moving forward. I was a freshman when we did redistricting 10 years ago here in Nevada, and so I wasn't part of the process leading up to session, but from what I saw then, there was a determination pretty much on the front end that no matter what happened, it was going to end up in a lawsuit. And that was 10 years ago. Between then and now, I don't think, and several members of this committee probably feel the same way, I've never been sued more. And so what does the landscape look like from your perspective, if you have one, in Utah, about the possibility of there even being a kumbaya redistricting effort? Because what I've been hearing across the country from other leaders is every state should just prepare for a lawsuit, whether there's adequate grounds or not.
Very good question. Certainly the political climate going into the 2020 redistricting cycle is more intense than perhaps any of us have ever experienced before. I can't say with any certainty that Utah will come to a conclusion that people in the legislature and without would not want to seek litigation to resolve. There's what I do know is that I believe, at any rate, that the more people who are brought into the redistricting process, the open-mindedness that the legislature might have towards members of the public and the minority party when drawing plans helps to overcome some of the difficulties in the redistricting process. There's a great deal at stake. in redistricting. It sets the tone for a complete decade. And certainly those who feel disenfranchised or don't feel like the plans accommodated their interests have that opportunity to seek litigation in the courts. One thing, though, that if people feel heard, if they feel that their ideas and their concepts and their understanding of the redistricting process is listened to and understood and tried to be accommodated, sometimes that helps in the litigation process, sometimes not. I don't know enough about Nevada to know if you will be able to sing Kumbaya at the end of your redistricting process. I don't know, frankly, enough about Utah, and this is my fourth redistricting cycle to know if we will be sued. I do know that we've been many decades without facing litigation, hope to have another one, but I can't say with any confidence that we won't be sued.
Thank you. Speaker, did you have any further questions?
Sorry, I just kind of had a little technical. I'm fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions from committee members? Okay, I see none. I hear none. So, Mr. Howell, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and the experiences in Utah regarding redistricting. And I'm sure that our staff will be communicating with you as we both go through this process. So thank you again so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you to your staff. You have wonderful staff in Nevada.
Yes, we do, and we know it. So thank you. We appreciate that. So next we'll move on to Haley Prohl. She's going to do the third part of this agenda item. So Haley, please go ahead. As soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Haley Prohl. I am the GIS analyst and redistricting GIS specialist with the research division at LCB. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the public participation capabilities of the redistricting software purchased for the Nevada Legislature, as you may now be curious to know what public participation will look like or will have the potential to look like in Nevada next year. So staff does not have the software in hand yet. It is in the process of being ordered. So I can't speak to many specifics, but I can speak generally about the public participation capabilities of the software. And from the looks of it, it seems that it will operate in a similar way to Utah's platform. So the Nevada Legislature purchased redistricting desktop licenses for staff and an online redistricting tool for the public. Both types of licenses are through the same vendor, Citygate GIS, which will allow for seamless integration between the public license and staff desktop licenses. The public redistricting tool is called mydistricting.com, and it can be accessed over the internet by any registered user. So in 2011, as Michael Stewart discussed, public participation in terms of drafting plans was limited mainly to the public workstations in Carson City and Las Vegas, and a few public hearings in rural areas. Citygate GIS did not have an online redistricting option in 2011. So it is new to the Nevada Legislature this redistricting cycle. So now members of the public will be able to participate in redistricting through any device with an internet connection. The system is designed to be easy to use and simple to learn. Users can create redistricting plans, share their work with specific groups, solicit and manage comments from others, and submit their plans for consideration. On the management side of things, mydistricting.com provides tools that allow tracking of submitted plans, analysis, quality control, evaluation, feedback to the plan creator, as well as approval and rejection functions. The tools are designed to support the entire workflow from citizen plan development to submission, consideration, and approval. As the state of Utah did, staff will likely have to come up with some submission guidelines and other protocols surrounding the public software and submissions as session approaches. Though the public redistricting software will be accessible through any device with an internet connection, we still plan to install mydistricting.com on the public workstations. So there will be one in Carson City and one in Las Vegas. However, especially in the times of COVID-19, it is great to have an option for the public to participate in redistricting without having to leave their homes. A link to mydistricting.com will be made available on the Nevada Legislature's 2021 reapportionment and redistricting website, and possibly other locations online for the public to access once the time comes. We also plan to post proposed public and legislative plans to the redistricting website to make available for public viewing in real time during redistricting. And so once we receive the redistricting software next month, we look forward to learning more about exactly how this public redistricting tool will operate. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prohl. Committee members, any questions for Ms. Prohl? I don't see any yet. So I'm sure as we go through this process, there will be a lot of questions for you moving forward. So I think with that, we will next move to agenda item number 8, which is the overview of the use of partisan data in redistricting and selection of elections for the 2021 redistricting database. And we will welcome back Ms. Haley Prohl and Mr. Sam Quast. And there is a PowerPoint for that as well, I believe. So you may begin as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Just trying to share my screen again for the record. My name is Haley Prohl. I am the GIS analyst and redistricting GIS specialist with the research division. I hope you can all see my screen now. So today my colleague Sam Quast and I are going to provide an overview of the use of partisan data in redistricting and provide recommendations for the selection of elections to be used in the 2021 redistricting database. For at least the past three redistricting cycles, 1991, 2001, and 2011, the Nevada Legislature has included election results in the redistricting database to provide some measure of competitiveness of districts in redistricting plans. By using election results from multiple competitive statewide elections across several election cycles.
Haley, I'm sorry, Ms. Prohl, this is broadcast. Could I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Sure.
We can't see your presentation. Could you bring it back up again for us?
Yes.
Sorry, I was trying not to interrupt.
Let me,
Thank you. We can see it now. Go right ahead.
okay, great. So by using election results from multiple competitive statewide elections across several election cycles, the election data depicts a comparison of voting patterns over the years and provides a method for evaluating the political effects of redistricting plans. Before diving into the elections recommended for the 2021 redistricting database, we thought it would be a good idea to include a legal primer on the use of partisan data in redistricting. So now I will go ahead and turn it over to Sam to get us started.
All right, well, thank you. Good afternoon, Sam Quast, Legal Division, Legislative Counsel Bureau. I'm going to give a brief overview of the legal basis for the use of partisan data in the redistricting process. If we want to pull up the first slide here. There we go. Thanks. So courts use the term partisan data or political data to refer to various types of information pertaining to the political process that is sometimes used for certain purposes in redistricting. This type of information includes party registration, voter history, the addresses of incumbent office holders, and other similar political information. The United States Supreme Court and various lower courts have long recognized the legitimacy of using certain types of political data in the redistricting process for a variety of purposes. For example, in the case of Gaffney v. Cummings, Connecticut used the party voting results from the previous 3 statewide elections to fashion a redistricting plan that contained a roughly proportionate number of Republican and Democratic seats relative to each party's political strength in the state. The Supreme Court found that using political data to maintain the competitive balance among political parties did not offend the U.S. Constitution. So in addition to maintaining party competitiveness, courts have also sanctioned the use of political data to assist in furthering traditional districting principles. For example, the preservation of communities of interest has frequently been recognized as a traditional districting principle. Though the precise definition of what constitutes a community of interest varies, some courts and some provisions of state constitutions, statutes, and redistricting guidelines include the political beliefs, voting trends, and partisan interests of a particular group as relevant factors in identifying communities of interest, thereby authorizing the use of partisan data in recognizing and preserving these communities of interest. The protection of incumbents is another traditional districting principle that's been recognized by the Supreme Court and other lower courts. And it necessarily requires the use of the home addresses of incumbents to avoid contests between 2 incumbents. So if we go to the next slide. While courts have recognized the legitimacy of using partisan data in redistricting for the purposes of maintaining party competitiveness and furthering traditional districting principles, the most widely litigated issue concerning the use of partisan data in redistricting is the use of such data for the purposes of partisan gerrymandering. As we discussed in a previous meeting, in 2019 case, Rucho v. Common Cause, the United States Supreme Court held that partisan gerrymandering claims are not justiciable in the federal court system. Therefore, a federal court will no longer hear a case involving when the use of partisan data in redistricting for the purposes of partisan gerrymandering has gone so far that it violates the Constitution. However, such claims can be brought and have been brought in state courts. Some state constitutions, statutes, and redistricting guidelines prohibit the use of partisan data in redistricting altogether, or prohibit the drawing of districts to favor a particular party or person. Nevada law has no restrictions on the use of political data in the redistricting process. Additionally, the Nevada Supreme Court has never addressed the issue of using partisan data for the purposes of partisan gerrymandering. Because courts have generally upheld the use of partisan data for the purposes of maintaining party competitiveness, preserving communities of interest, and avoiding contests between incumbents, it would most likely be permissible to use partisan data for those purposes. However, it is unclear as to whether and to what extent the use of partisan data for the purposes of partisan gerrymandering is permissible in Nevada. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Haley.
Thank you, Sam. So one point I want to make is that partisan data, specifically election results, is only an estimate of competitiveness. It is not an exact measure. So election results are reported at the precinct level, which is a different geography level than what the 2020 census redistricting data will be reported at, which is the census block level. Precincts are geographically larger than census blocks, so the election data must be disaggregated down to the census block level, which makes it less accurate and more of an estimate. So the image on the right shows the difference in geographical size between precincts and census blocks. Precinct boundaries are outlined in red and census blocks are outlined in black. And for reference, the colored areas represent state assembly districts. Partisan data has been used in Nevada before for at least the 3 previous redistricting cycles. Below are the races used in 2011 and 2001. In 2011, the 2006 governor race, 2008 presidential race, and 2010 US Senate and state treasurer races were used in the redistricting database. In 2001, the 1996 presidential race, 1998 Senate race, US Senate race, and 2000 US President and US Senate races were used. In each case, elections were drawn from the previous 3 election cycles and 4 races were used. In 1991, which is not listed, elections were also used from the past 3 election cycles, but only 3 races were used. When choosing election data to include in the redistricting database, there are a few criteria to consider to ensure that the election data chosen will be useful. So first, elections should be partisan. Nonpartisan races like Supreme Court elections will not provide any information about the competitiveness of a district or proposed redistricting plan. Elections should also be statewide. We want election data that encompasses the entire geography of the state, not just a subset of voter precincts within Nevada. So this rules out all local elections and regional elections like those for state senate, state assembly, and congressional seats, among others. Elections should be competitive. Otherwise, we have no good measure for competitiveness. Races in which the winning candidate won by a very large percentage do not provide any insight into how competitive a district or redistricting plan may be because the data is inherently not competitive. And elections should have occurred in recent years. So we do need election results from multiple different years, but we should not reach back too far in time as older election results may be less accurate due to shifting political landscapes and changes to precinct boundaries over time. So for the 2021 redistricting database, staff has outlined all of the partisan statewide elections from 2016, 2018, and 2020. The percentage in parentheses listed after each candidate is the percentage of votes they received in the election. The difference between the percentage of votes received by the candidates of the 2 major political parties are listed at the end of each row. The lower the percentage difference, the more competitive the election. And the most competitive races for each election year are highlighted. The only statewide partisan race for 2020 is the presidential election. We are in the unique position that we are selecting the elections for the database for the 2020 election. So at this time, we do not know how competitive the 2020 presidential election will be. However, it is still included for consideration because it would be preferable to have a race from the election cycle immediately prior to the redistricting cycle. So staff recommends the committee select 4 elections for the redistricting database with at least 1 election from each year. Staff recommends selecting the 2020 presidential election as one of the 4 on the condition that it is ultimately competitive. Again, it would be preferable to have an election from the most recent election cycle in the database. In 2011, LCB staff used a threshold of a 10% difference in votes between the two candidates of the two major political parties to determine whether an election was competitive or not. If the 2020 presidential election were selected today, we could use a 10% difference in votes as the threshold to determine whether the 2020 presidential election should ultimately remain in the redistricting database. If the 2020 presidential election turns out not to be competitive, we will use the remaining 3 elections selected today for the database, and staff is confident that 3 elections would be sufficient for the database. So again, staff recommends selecting 4 elections, including the 2020 presidential race, on the condition that it turns out to be competitive and the difference in votes between the candidates is not more than 10%. The remaining 3 elections should be chosen from 2016 and 2018, with at least 1 election from each year. And competitiveness should be given favorable consideration. The most competitive races will yield the most useful data for measuring competitiveness and the political effects of redistricting plans. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any before moving on to selecting the elections. And then at that point, I can surely go back to the slide that lists all of those elections for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pearl. Okay, with that, let's go to committee members' questions on this item. And this is an action item for today. So we're looking at partisan data in redistricting and selecting the elections that we're going to use. So discussion and questions. Any questions from committee members? We have 3 highlighted. So one of the questions I would throw out to the committee would be what would be your thoughts regarding the 4th slot that we need to fill? And the most current year would be 2018. Mr. Speaker, go ahead.
In the ones that were highlighted, which ones were highlighted?
The ones that are highlighted are 2016. Ms. Pearl, could you put up that slide again? 2016 is the presidential race with a 2.42 difference. In 2018 is the attorney general race, which has a 0.47% difference. And then 2020, the US president. There we go. So we need to, in processing a motion here, we would need to find a 4th slot, assuming we will take the other 3 as recommended by staff, which all 3 of them certainly make sense to me, but we need to find a 4th.
This is Heidi Ganser.
Please, go ahead, Senator Ganser.
Thank you. You know, in looking at these different races, I was thinking maybe the Secretary of State race. That is also a very tight race, but it had a Republican winner versus I think all the other ones were Democrat winners. So maybe we need something more in reverse. But it's also a very, very close race.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All of the rest of, other than the state treasurer's race, that's the only other close one in 2018. So, okay, what is your pleasure? Any questions? If not, the chair will accept a motion from the speaker.
I would move along, consistent with what Senator Ganser had noted on the 4th option.
I would second that.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion from Speaker Frierson, second from Senator Gansert, to select in 2016 the U.S. President race, in 2018 the Secretary of State race, and in 2020 the U.S. President race. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll have Mr. Stewart call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Michael Stewart. And just for clarification on our minutes, did that motion, the fourth one, also include the Secretary of State race in 2018? Was that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And the Attorney General. I think she missed that.
Oh, Attorney.
Sorry. Yes. Yes, in 2018, it would be the Secretary of State race and the Attorney General's race. In 16 would be the U.S. President. In 2020 would be U.S. President.
Okay, roll call for that one. Senator Cancella. Senator Cancella. All right, we'll go back. Senator Cannizzaro.
Here.
Senator Gansert.
Here. Or yes.
Oh, sorry.
We
I
need
gotcha.
yes or no.
Okay. Senator Goycochea.
Yes.
Chair Woodhouse.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Okay. Assemblyman Frierson.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy.
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Yes.
Assemblyman Watts.
Yes.
And going back to Senator Cancella. Okay. Motion passes, Madam Chair.
I have to come off mute. Okay, the motion has passed. Thank you very much. We will now go on to agenda item number 9, which is the review of possible recommendations for increasing the maximum size of precincts set forth in Nevada revised statutes. And we'll go to Mr. Stewart and Mr. Killian from LCB. So gentlemen, please begin when you're ready.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, this is Michael Stewart with LCB Research Division. I'm going to share just a little write-up that's also uploaded on the web. Hopefully you can see it there. Agenda item number 9 for the consideration of a recommendation to increase the maximum size of precincts set forth in Nevada Revised Statutes 293-207. Committee members, this particular provision sets forth the maximum number of registered voters that are permitted in an election precinct, the maximum number of active registered voters. It's currently set at 3,000. And at its meeting of last month, you'll recall that the members of the committee heard testimony from the registrar of voters in both Clark County and Washoe County, who noted that in some cases, certain areas of their counties could accommodate precincts with more than 3,000 active registered voters. And in addition, under the new vote center model used by Nevada's counties, the need to assign voters to a single precinct or a single polling location is no longer necessary. And they further noted that being able to assign more voters into one precinct would be helpful in avoiding the splitting into multiple precincts of certain high density population areas, such as larger apartment complexes or certain neighborhoods. There was, of course, some discussion about how that would affect the rural communities. And I would note that testimony indicated that since the proposed increase sets forth a maximum number of active voters per precinct, certain jurisdictions, to include rural counties, could continue to create smaller precincts as needed or leave their existing precincts unchanged. So based on that, that testimony, I think the question for the committee today is, does the committee wish to recommend a bill draft request to amend NRS 293-207 to increase from 3,000 to 5,000 the maximum number of active voters participated in an election precinct? And I would note for members of the committee that I did reach out to Joe Gloria, Registrar of Voters in Clark County, and obviously he's quite occupied right now with early voting, but he did say that he was certainly okay with that recommendation. And of course, committee members should know that, if the number certainly could be adjusted if need be through an amendment for next session, but this would certainly get the BDR in process. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you unless my colleague, Mr. Killian, has further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Killian, did you wish to add any remarks to this agenda item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. No, I believe Michael covered it pretty well. The only thing I would note is that an increase from 3,000 to 5,000 would be consistent with previous amendments to this section. Generally, each time the legislature has considered this number for an increase, the increase has been between 50 and 100% of the previous number. So this increase would be consistent with previous actions.
Very good. Thank you very much. So discussion from committee members, and this is essentially to increase the number of the maximum size of precincts from 3,000 to 5,000 active voters. Discussion?
Madam Chair, I had a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So, just for my own curiosity, is there a minimum number of people in each precinct, or do we just call out the maximum?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. There is no minimum set forth in statute. That's left up to each county. All that we establish in statute is a maximum number of members in each precinct, or maximum number of voters in each precinct.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Speaker, do you wish to make the motion regarding this item?
So moved. I move to raise the cap to 5,000.
And we have a motion from Speaker Frierson to increase the maximum size of precincts from 3,000 to 5,000. Do we have a second?
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think that was Senator Gansard.
Assemblywoman Howdy.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Assemblywoman. I appreciate that. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Stewart will have you call the roll, and just a reminder, yes or no on the motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Cancella.
Yes.
Senator Canizaro.
Yes.
Senator Gansert.
Yes.
Senator Goycochea.
Yes.
Chair Woodhouse.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Assemblyman Frierson.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdy.
Yes. Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Yes.
And Assemblyman Watts.
Yes.
Motion passes, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. So next we'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is the review of possible recommendations for the adoption of rules for reapportionment and redistricting. And again, we will go to Mr. Killian and Mr. Stewart. So gentlemen, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Michael Stewart with the Research Division of the Legislative Council Bureau. I hope I'm successfully sharing the other screen here to show agenda item number 10. As we've discussed several times throughout the interim, this committee does make recommendations typically for rules for reapportionment and redistricting for the upcoming redistricting exercise. So as a little bit of background, when recommending rules for reapportionment and redistricting and inclusion into the joint rules, rather than voting on specific rule language, Previous iterations of this interim study generally would vote on the particular principles it wishes to include, and these would then serve as a basis for the drafting of the relevant portions of the joint standing rules for the regular session, which are approved on day one of the regular session. And then those rules would, of course, encapsulate the redistricting principles that the legislature intends to follow when drawing lines for the upcoming decade. So as a review in 2011, the recommendation for the rules included addressing the responsibility for redistricting measures and the approval of research requests, the equality of representations for the various districts, the use of a population database for reapportionment and redistricting, and that's the database that this committee just approved. The use of census geography for district boundaries, the procedures for the Senate and Assembly committees who are tasked with reapportionment and redistricting, compliance with the Voting Rights Act, and as I noted previously, public participation in the reapportionment and redistricting process. And so these recommendations are generally handled the housekeeping and staff management elements of the redistricting process, in addition to specifically citing the equality of population, the use of census geography, and compliance with the Voting Rights Act as guiding redistricting principles. So I think the discussion for the committee today, and based on the material that's been presented so far this interim, relative to the matters that are discussed above, that maybe in 2011, that they appear to be appropriate to recommend for the 2021 session. In addition to other matters brought before the study this interim that might merit inclusion are recommendations to adopt rules that require the nesting of assembly districts within Senate districts, authorizing the use of a database of election data for the purposes of preventing contests between incumbents and performing an analysis to ensure compliance with Voting Rights Act. That again is tied in with the database elections that we talked about earlier. And encouraging district lines when possible to take into account local government boundaries and districts to minimize the number of ballot styles created by local election administrators. And then, of course, based on the appetite of the committee members, following the presentation on public participation, it may be helpful to recommend rules language that establishes some parameters for public participation. Obviously, I laid those out from the 2011 cycle. You could certainly go with that, but there could be other things you wish to require concerning public submissions to be complete maps that include all districts rather than a single district, and requiring a minimum number of public hearings regarding apportionment, reapportionment, and redistricting in northern, southern, and rural Nevada to encourage more public participation. And that last piece was included in 2011 as well. And I would just note that there are also some plan submission requirements could be set forth in committee rules and adopted committee rules, which could be amended appropriately as needed to best accommodate the needs of the public and the redistricting committees, to include the committee schedule and the availability of the census data upon its delivery to Nevada. So with that, Madam Chair, that's kind of a summary of the recommendation, and I'll get over to you unless my colleague, Mr. Killian, may have more to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Killian, any further discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Council. I think Mr. Stewart did a great job presenting those recommendations. The only thing I would offer, just as a matter of background on the nesting of assembly districts, that is not an issue that in the past has been included in the redistricting rules, in the joint standing rules. And that is because before this previous decade, the legislature had not nested its assembly districts within Senate districts. That was a creation of the court during the 2011 process, and not part of the legislative drawing of lines. However, based on the testimony the committee received, it seems that that is a principle that the legislature may want to preserve. And if so, it would be helpful, especially to your legal team in defending any possible future challenges to maps, if that priority is included within the rules as one of the criteria to be used when the legislature evaluates maps.
Thank you very much. So with that, we will open to comments and questions from committee members.
Madam Chair, this is Assemblyman Watts. I have a quick question.
Please go ahead, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that in an earlier meeting, we had also discussed the content of the actual approved legislative measure and defining the boundaries. And we had discussed the possibility, I think, in the future of referencing a map file instead. And I just wanted to ask staff if that is something that needs to be addressed in the rules at all, or if that's something that we can decide as we're crafting the legislation.
Mr. Stewart or Mr. Killian?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Council. That is something that your various staff divisions have been working very hard on during this interim to enable. We believe we're going to have a solution available for that. My suggestion, though, would be that that might be a better matter for the committee rules rather than the joint standing rules at this point, because we're not certain what the contours of the solution will be just yet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions, comments? Well, I, for one, will just say that when I was first elected, I had pieces of 9 assembly districts in my Senate district. And so after the 2011 redistricting, by having 2 assembly districts nested inside my district, it made it a lot easier working with community concerns when we wanted to bring together the senator for that issue and the assembly people, rather than trying to bring in 9 or 10 people in addressing one specific issue within a community. So I highly support us including the nesting of the assembly districts within the Senate districts. Anyone else? Any questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Speaker, do you want to put forth a motion regarding agenda item number 10?
Sure, and Madam Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we were considering was adopting rules with respect to redistricting that were identical to the rules from a decade ago, plus the 3 additional rules set forth and shared on the screen.
That is correct.
I would then make that motion.
Thank you. And do we have a second to the motion?
Second that.
And I didn't.
Goycochea.
Oh, Senator Goycochea, thank you. So the motion has been made by Speaker Frierson, seconded by Senator Goycochea. And so that will include the 2011, as well as the 3 additional ones that were on the possible recommendations for 2021. So I think we're good with that. So unless there's further discussion. Okay, Mr. Stewart, you may call the roll.
Thank you. Senator Cancela.
Yes.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Yes.
Senator Gansert.
Yes.
Senator Goycochea.
Yes.
Chair Woodhouse.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Yes.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy.
Yes. Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Yes.
And Assemblyman Watts.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And as Mr. Stewart indicated, that motion has passed. So with that, we're going to go back to agenda item number 4. And that one is the update of the United States Census Bureau activities, outreach, and census response rates in Nevada, and discussion of future census operations. And we have Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Berman available, I believe. And there's a PowerPoint for that one as well. So gentlemen, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Guillermo Gonzalez. I serve as Congressional Liaison with the United States Census Bureau. And this afternoon, I'm just going to give you a brief update on our operations in Nevada. We're going to the first slide. We adjusted our, I think that's the third slide, Michael. I want to go to the second one. Yeah, that one. That's it. So due to the pandemic, we adjusted our time frame for the census. And as everybody knows, the census concluded on October 15th at 11:59 Hawaii Standard Time. We adjusted all our operations from the original dates that you see on the left to the dates that you see on the right. Our surface-based enumeration ran from September 22nd through the 24th. The non-sheltered outdoor locations, which included the homeless population, concluded on September 24th and began on September 23rd. The group quarters, as you see, went from April 2nd through September 3rd. The transitory locations went from September 3rd to the 28th. The internet and self-response, of course, ran all the way up to October 15th. The paper response forms will be accepted by the Census Bureau as long as they're postmarked by October 15th and received no later than October 22nd. The delivery of apportionment data to the President is due on December 31st, 2020. As with regard to the delivery of redistricting data, that plan is still in development. Excuse me. Next slide, please. We want to thank, especially in large part to our partnership with the Three Square Group, the Regional Transportation Commission, and the Clark County School District. Our team in Nevada worked closely with these groups and completed approximately 432 mobile questionnaire assistance events across the state since August 27th. On August 27th, Nevada's self-response rate was approximately 63.7%. By October 15th, at the conclusion of the census, Nevada's self-response rate was 66.6%. Next slide, please. So our census takers were trained to rigorously and universally follow the CDC recommendations and guidelines to mitigate the risk of transmission, and this included wearing a face mask, maintaining social distance of 6 feet or more, practicing hand hygiene, and not entering homes or facilities to conduct interviews. Most of our interviews were conducted outside to the extent possible. And in most cases, our census workers made up to 6 attempts at each housing unit to count people where they resided. Next slide, please. So our nationwide self-response rate as of October 15th at the conclusion of the census was 99% of addresses were accounted for, and 66% were accounted through the self-response, either online, by phone, or by mail. And the remaining 33% were accounted through our non-response follow-up operation. And incidentally, the self-response rate was higher than in 2010. And this was largely due to the first time that the census was available online for folks to respond to. Next slide, please. We maximize our staff and our production hours to collect field data. And our field collection, as I stated earlier, did end on October 15th. The data, the date, has not yet been set for the release of redistricting data. Now that the collection period has ended, the Census Bureau is evaluating its schedules for producing that data. Once an apportionment schedule has been solidified, then we will be able to reestablish excuse me, somebody's calling. Then we will be able to reestablish the redistricting schedule. Hopefully, we'll be able to make some announcements regarding the release of redistricting data soon, as our data is tabulated. Next slide. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Brian to give you a summary of response rates in Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing us to be here with you today. Thank you to the committee. My name is Brian Lee Berman. I am the Senior Partnership Specialist here in the great state of Nevada. I'm here in the very pleasant capacity to share with you the really great data that we have from the both self-response and total enumeration. Mr. Stewart, would you please show slide 3? We're looking at the 2020 response rate table.
Mr. Stewart,
Can you
this
kindly
is
let me
Jen
know
with
when it's up?
Broadcast. I'm sorry, could you, I'm going to stop your screen share. We're having an issue. It's not showing everywhere. And then if you could just show it for me again, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, let me try this one more time. Thank you. All right, so share it again.
One moment, we're confirming. We're good. Thank you. You may proceed.
Mr. Berman, I'm on your cover slide.
Will you please take us to slide 3, the 2020 response rate tables?
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. So I wanted to begin today first giving you an overview of how Nevada did generally in the 2020 census, and then I'm going to show you some of the granular data. It's really great. You'll enjoy it, I promise. First, let's start. I want to start in the left-hand column there, total self-responded. You will see that Nevada finished terrific, 25th in the nation. For those of you who don't know, in 2010, Nevada was 40th in the nation in self-response. The growth from 40th to 25th is the best growth of any state. So that is really, really great. We're thrilled about that. I also want to show you on that left column, the total enumerated column. Those rankings are in terms of relative total enumerated responses. So although each one says number 1, they're ranked from highest to lowest. And these are just a public table. This is available online. So this is literally a screenshot that we took yesterday that I could just show you now. So you can check this yourself. Nevada was 24th, as we counted, in the nation in total enumerated, which is also very, very good. I want to, it's really exciting, and then you'll see also that the states were ahead of in terms of total enumeration. Nebraska, Minnesota, Michigan, Massachusetts, Maryland. Right? So, I mean, we did really, really well here in 2020, and we should all be very, very proud. The really exciting data, though, is on slide 4, Mr. Stewart, if you please. And we'll take a look here at the growth rate. That's really where you can see, and I'll wait for you, please let me know when you're there.
Do we still have Mr. Berman, or did we lose him?
No, I'm sorry. I want just a confirmation that you were on the growth rate page. Excuse me.
Yes, we're on the page that says Nevada 2020 self-response growth rates.
Thank you so much. I apologize. So I wanted to begin right on this first line, the top line here, and just take a moment to kind of almost pause and reflect. As we can see, in 2010, the self-response rate in Nevada, 61.4%. The growth to 66.6% is an astounding 8.5%. And as I said earlier, that is the highest growth rate in the entire nation in self-response. You all should be very, very proud. That is an amazing accomplishment to be number 1 in the nation. And you can't argue with that, right? And I wanted to I gave you some of the localities here so that we could kind of get an understanding of how we did so well. And I wanted to start with the city. Our cities did so well, and they're really the crown jewel of the effort, if you ask me. The city of Las Vegas, 8.3% growth, right? Can't beat that. City of North Las Vegas, double-digit growth, 10.1% growth from 2010. I also highlighted the city of Henderson, that although the 8.3% growth is great, I wanted folks to see that 76% growth rate, which I must apologize, it's actually 76.1%. This table is from last week. Henderson has the fourth highest self-response rate of the cities with 200,000 people in the entire nation. Wow, right? Well, only 3 cities did better than Henderson. But I also wanted to point out that move to that second line, Clark County, that if you notice that Clark County's growth rate, right, we went from 60.4% to 67.1% at 11.1% growth. That's even higher than those amazing numbers posted by the cities, which means that the best growth was coming from the unincorporated parts of the county. So it was really, I mean, when you remember that Clark County has almost 2.3 million people, to get a locality that large to grow at 11.1% is an amazing accomplishment, which in my humble opinion speaks to the depth and the breadth of our volunteer network. Just between the complete count committees that we had and all the amazing partnerships that we formed, that's not possible to grow at 11% in Clark County without the vast network of partners that we have and volunteers. So just a hearty congratulations to everyone. And I also wanted to point out, it's not just the larger cities in Clark. Mesquite, 25% growth. I mean, come on, that's fantastic. But also the growth it's seen in the northern part of the state as well. Washow's 4% growth is great, right? But we also saw some very silly growth statistics in some northern parts, right? City of Fernley, 17%. Story County, 36.9, right? Up to 64.6. Lyon County, 14.7% growth. So it's the growth in Nevada's self-response rate. It's all over the state, but particularly in our biggest population centers. Folks really came together and decided that this project was important, and the data reflects that. And to thank our wonderful partners, Mr. Stewart, please, slide 5. We are happy and excited to announce the first ever 2020 census. Thank you, the gala, I believe is the technical term for it, where we are going to be in conjunction with the Nevada Complete Count Committee, the Census Bureau, is going to celebrate all of the wonderful people that helped make this self-response rate growth possible. We're going to be statewide over Zoom. It's going to be 10 November, 1 p.m. We cordially invite everyone on this call to join us and on the meeting. Please join us. If you'd like an invitation, please send me an email at the address on your screen there, brian.l.berman@2020census.gov. And I will send that invitation to you in the days after the election, the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday after the 4 November election. And before I turn it over for questions from Mr. Gonzalez and I had 2 more points of business. If folks are interested in if you want to sign up, you can for the initial release of the 2020 census data. That can be done at 2020census.gov. If you go there now, you can click a link and enter your email address, and you'll be the first one to be alerted once the data is released. So I would recommend doing that. And then second, tomorrow, we're going to have a 2020 Census Operations and Next Step Press. It's a national press conference that I want to invite everyone to attend. If you have further questions about census operations, that's going to be held. Mr. Fontenot and Mr. Olson, the gentleman in charge of the 2020 census, will be leading the press discussion. I want to give you the phone number now and the passcode to call in if you're interested. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow. The telephone number to call in, 888-989-9788. Again, the phone number is 888-989-9788. The passcode, 516-1860. Again, the passcode, 516-1860. I thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us a little time today. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing us such great news. So we'll go to questions and discussion from committee members. for Mr. Gonzalez or Mr. Berman? Any committee members with questions or comments? Yeah, I don't see any. So thank you both so very much for your presentation today. And I believe Mr. Stewart got the phone number and information written down. So we'll send that out to the committee members again in case anyone wants to sign up for those events. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you, Madam Chair.
And now we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is an overview of Nevada's Complete Count Committee decennial census outreach efforts in Nevada, an update on the use of the legislative appropriation that was made in Senate Bill 504 for Nevada census activities. And we welcome Christina Lopez, Director of Outreach and Community Relations with the Lieutenant Governor's Office. And she will be followed by Catherine Bartlett from the Executive Budget Office with the Governor's Finance Office. So you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for hosting us today. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Lopez for the record, and I am here on behalf of the Lieutenant Governor's Office. It's great to see all of you here today, and I hope in good spirits. I know this has been a long year for all of us, so thank you for having me today. I have been asked to present to you a summary of the efforts put forth by the State Complete Count Committee over the course of the last 18 months. A well-known fact for the record, Governor Sisolak established the State Complete Count Committee in April of 2019, naming the Lieutenant Governor chair of this committee. I'm going to go through a brief summary of all we did since our first meeting in June of last year, and this shouldn't take too long. I would be happy to answer any questions you have along the way if I am able. So I'll begin with my quick recap. June of 2019, we held our first Complete Count Committee meeting, bringing together the 9 members appointed by the governor. Lieutenant Governor Kate Marshall served as chair, Assemblywoman Sandra Howdeggy served as vice chair. The remaining members were Secretary of State Barbara Sagasti, Senator James Settlemeyer, City of Sparks Councilman Chris Dare, Davis Gonzalez, Nicole Lamboli, Dagny Stapleton, and Emily Zamora. This was an introductory meeting. We went over the plan and expectations of the upcoming year and a half, and the Census Bureau presented the committee with their outreach, field, and enumeration plans. In August of 2019, the Complete Count Committee met to discuss programmatic items such as best practices when targeting hard to count communities, and the possibility of creating subcommittees which would be tasked with building an outreach program for certain areas of focus. For example, they would have to build out a specialized plan for education outreach, unions, tribal outreach, or our faith-based communities. In September 2019, the committee officially voted to create 6 subcommittees. Those subcommittees were the government subcommittee, which focused on engaging our federal delegation, our elected officials and their constituencies, government workers, military members, and veterans across the state. We had the education subcommittee, which was tasked with creating and executing a plan to have every student from pre-K to higher education counted in the 2020 census. The employer subcommittee was among the 6 subcommittees created, and we collaborated with our union partners, our chambers of commerce, our resorts and casinos. The list goes on. This subcommittee worked hard to create a plan to ensure that every employee and or patron of our businesses would have the opportunity to be counted while on company grounds. The tribal subcommittee, partners across the state from our tribal nations were creative and persistent in their task of ensuring their representation in this year's census. They were quite successful. The organizational subcommittee, which was our nonprofit and faith-based focus subcommittee, we gathered nonprofit and faith-based leaders from across the state to represent Nevada and to assist us in reaching their networks and congregations. And finally, we had the Hard to Count subcommittee. This subcommittee was set on counting every individual from our hardest to reach neighborhoods. Over 75 individuals made up the committee and the 6 subcommittees, each person representing a different community, industry, or trade across the state. We met once to twice a month while we were able. Again, that was 7 committees, 75 members of the community total meeting once to twice a month to discuss census outreach efforts. We discussed various topics, but focused on the most effective ways to reach particular communities of focus. Many ideas were taking shape during these meetings. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Many ideas were taking shape during these meetings. Multilingual events were discussed. Our higher ed institutions were creating plans to reach their student base. Our employee subcommittee was working on creative ways to engage both the small business community and the resort and casino industry. We were met with full cooperation from all involved. October 2019, the committee established 2 types of grants, which were made available to the public to apply for. These grants made it possible for organizations and/or community partners to contribute to our success in this year's decennial census. The first type of grant was the partner grant, which had a maximum award of $2,000. The second type of grant was the mini grant, which awarded a maximum of $10,000. During this October meeting, we also voted on the grants application and approval process. Grant applications would first be seen by the governor's finance office, where they would go through a quality check and a check for completion. They would then head to the governor's office for review and for possible recommendations. Finally, grant applications would be presented to the State Complete Count Committee for final review and possible approval. November and December of 2019, we met Carrie Dermick, who served as our statewide coordinator for the census. As the subcommittee's plans continued to evolve, we engaged other community partners, such as the Clark County Libraries, who were incredibly helpful. We worked on drafting plans for weeks and weekends of action on school campuses, at food banks, and at children's story times in libraries across the state. The point of these plans and weekends of actions was to prepare for the March 12th launch of the census survey. March 10th, 2020, we're getting very close to the great turn of events here. The committee met to approve a number of grant applications from community partners. Of the 9 grants presented, 9 were approved. Some were approved as presented, some were approved with contingencies or adjustments. I would like to note the 9 applications presented to the State Complete Count Committee on this date were just some of the applications received. The applications not reviewed by the State Complete Count Committee on March 10th were still making their way through the other 2 steps of the grant application and approval process. I will quickly go over the 9 grants that were presented and approved. The first one was from Humboldt Human Services. They submitted a partner grant application requesting $2,000 to purchase swag like hand sanitizer, lip balms, pens, cups that they would be handing out at various census party events that they plan to host. That grant was approved as presented for the $2,000. The Humboldt County Library submitted a partner grant application requesting $1,700 to purchase 2 computers, 2 kiosk desks, and advertising posters, which they would use at various community library census events. That grant application was approved for the $1,700. The Food Bank of Northern Nevada, an incredible partner, submitted a mini grant application requesting $10,000 to purchase computers, swag, and other informational items, which would be used at their various food distribution events across the region, specifically the rural counties of Humboldt, Elko, Pershing, Lander, Eureka, White Pine, Churchill, Story, Lyon, Douglas, and Carson. That grant application was approved for up to $10,000. The Heritage Senior Facility submitted a partner grant application requesting $1,614 to purchase an iPad with Apple Care insurance for their facility so that their residents and patrons could complete the census on site. That grant application was approved with a contingency that the senior facility paid for the last of the 2 years of the Apple Care insurance. We were willing to pay for the first year, and the facility would just have to pay for the second year of the Apple Care insurance. The 5th of 9 grant applications presented on the 10th came from Nevada 211. They submitted a mini grant application requesting $3,490 for a texting outreach program to promote the census. That grant application was approved as presented. Number 6 was from City of North Las Vegas. They submitted a partner grant application requesting $2,000 to purchase hand cards. The city had already purchased shirts. They wanted to purchase hand cards to go along with the distribution of the shirts to promote the census, and that application was approved. Number 7 came from Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition, or the SNRPC. They submitted a mini grant application requesting $5,000 to purchase promotional materials such as wrist bracelets, buttons, posters, rally signs that would be distributed at events across the central Las Vegas Valley before and during census enumeration. That application was approved up to $5,000 with the notice to correct language used in the application regarding undocumented communities. The 8th was from the city of Mesquite. They submitted a mini grant application requesting $4,950 for promotional materials as well as event supplies, t-shirts, etc. That application was approved also with the notice to correct certain language in their application regarding undocumented communities. The 9th and final application reviewed on March 10th came from Mineral County Library. They submitted a partner grant application requesting $1,750 to purchase 2 Dell computers that would be used solely for census outreach. That grant application was approved as presented. This meeting again was held on March 10th. 2 days later, on March 12th, 2020, census surveys were sent out to residents and response began. On March 13th, the committee had scheduled a data deep dive. We plan to train our committee and subcommittee members to use the ROAM database tool. Just for those of you who may not be familiar with ROAM, ROAM is an acronym which stands for Response Outreach Area Mapper. This tool provides a mapping of the various census tracts within our state. We wanted to provide this training to our committee members so that they could continue to tailor and fine-tune their outreach plans. However, due to the rapid increase in COVID-19 cases, we had to cancel that meeting. The next week, as we all know, everything shut down. The committee and subcommittee members did meet via teleconference line in April to connect and discuss ways in which we could adapt our plans of outreach. The best method and most viable tactic we had at the time was digital outreach, and we advised the members to use their social media and any other ways of contacting their networks for the time being. Additionally, the Governor's Finance Office provided a written statement to us on the status of the grants approved at the March 10th meeting, with which the Lieutenant Governor read aloud to the committee. That statement read as follows. The Governor's Finance Office has suspended most of the grants approved by the Complete Count Committee due to social distancing protocol. The Governor's Finance Office will reconsider the grants should social distancing restrictions be lifted. The Governor's Finance Office will no longer be accepting or processing any further grants at this time. This statement and procedure can be reevaluated in the future, but the Governor's Finance Office believes it is more likely than not that the Governor's Finance Office will not issue any further grants, including those that have already been received prior to COVID-19 circumstances. And that's the end of that statement. As the members of this committee know all too well, the state had to make some hard adjustments to our budget due to the economic shutdown. In addition, many of the plans laid out in the already approved grant applications were not conducive to the socially distant environment required by the emergency directives at that time. We fast forward to August of 2020. The committee met to receive a full update from the Census Bureau and to re-engage our committee and subcommittee members in these efforts as social distancing measures began to allow for more interaction, albeit with appropriate PPE. In September 2020, ongoing litigation at the time began to cause confusion over the official end date of the census. The Lieutenant Governor asked the committee members to host weekends of action in the month of September to promote the census as much as possible during the known final days of the 2020 census. In September, the Clark County School District, who was an incredible partner as well, Among all of the other events that they had scheduled and worked out with the Census Bureau, they also sent out communications to each of their families, encouraging them to complete their census. Three Square and the Food Bank of Northern Nevada, both sitting members of our committee and subcommittees, collaborated with the Census Bureau in scheduling hundreds of events across the state for outreach and census completion purposes. Census takers were present at food distribution events so that those present could complete their census on site. September 18th, the Lieutenant Governor recorded a video encouraging families to complete their census. Clark County School District, as well as Pershing County School District, presented this video to every social studies, history, and government teacher so they could present it to their students to inform and motivate them to ensure their family was also counted. The Lieutenant Governor called every mayor across the state of Nevada and asked them to reach out to their residents in any way in order to motivate them to complete their census. The Lieutenant Governor was in Las Vegas September 19th and 20th for a weekend of action. We scheduled census takers from the U.S. Census Bureau to be present at a few of the Cardenas markets in East Las Vegas. Assemblywoman Sandra Jauregui, along with other members of the Hispanic Caucus, as well as Nevada State College, Mi Familia Vota, and Make It Work Nevada, gathered volunteers to assist us in convincing members of the public to complete their census with the on-site census takers if they hadn't done so already. This was a successful weekend as we saw a 0.2% jump in our response rate percentage for that weekend alone. On September 26th through September 27th, we secured an emergency contract, which allowed us to deploy a texting and robocall outreach effort. We targeted zip codes with the lowest response rates in Clark County and Washoe. These zip codes, 11 in Clark, 2 in Washoe, covered areas such as East Las Vegas, Paradise, and Spring Valley, as well as a few areas in Northern Nevada with self-response rates below the national average. During the weekend of 9/26 through 9/27, we did 2 rounds of texting and robocall deployments. We sent out an additional round of text messages to 14 different zip codes in Clark on October 1st. We are awaiting the final report of these efforts from the data company. However, based on an analysis from our state demographer, Jeff Hardcastle, on the response rate improvement in the targeted areas from this weekend alone, what I have here is we know that between September 26th and October 1st, the dates of our targeted outreach, we saw 1,106 units added in Clark County in those targeted zip codes. And we saw 95.78 units added or enumerated in Washoe in those targeted zip codes during those dates. The units completed their census via internet, phone, or mail. Just for the record, I'd like to read aloud the zip codes that we targeted for those rounds. In Clark, we targeted 89101, 89103, 89104, 89106, 89109, 89119, 89030, 89169, 89102, 89115, and 89107. In Washoe, we targeted 89501 and 89451. On October 1st, the 14 zip codes we targeted in Clark were as follows: 89018, 89019, 89021, 89025, 89027, 89029, 89032, 89040, 89041, 89046, 89102, 89115, 89118, and 89119. We were in the process of planning our last weekends of action for the final weeks of October when the Supreme Court ruling was announced. This ruling allowed the administration to end the census count 16 days early. Census enumeration wrapped on October 15th at 11:59 Hawaii Standard Time or 2:59 a.m. Pacific Standard Time instead of October 31st. Our efforts have also concluded. Lastly, I want to say for the record that our committee and subcommittee members, those 75 Nevadans who gave their time to us these past 16 months, did so wholeheartedly. Corralling these members every week, asking them to push their plans further and to immerse the Census Bureau deeper into the community was no easy feat, but we did so with what we had, with the time and the resources that we had. This was a collaborative effort across the state. The pandemic certainly made life difficult for us, more than we could have ever imagined, yet the committee and subcommittee members persisted. On behalf of the Lieutenant Governor and our office, I want to thank the committee and the subcommittee members for their service to our state. That would conclude my summary. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer what I can.
Thank you so much. I just want to express my deepest appreciation to everyone in your office, all of your partner groups. I think we saw in the previous reports what a fabulous job was done, especially in such trying times. I know you're all totally committed to getting the best census count that you could under the circumstances, and I think you certainly accomplished that. So from me, thank you so very, very much, and please extend that to everyone as you wrap up your business with all of your partner groups.
Thank you.
Before we move on, any community members have any comments regarding Ms. Lopez's report?
I don't have a question, Madam Chair, but if I can make a comment.
Yes, I love it. Go right ahead, Assemblywoman. Go ahead.
I just want to thank Ms. Lopez and the Lieutenant Governor's office. They did a wonderful job overseeing the complete count committee throughout the process, and especially Ms. Lopez. It was just she did a wonderful job making sure that every single community, and especially our hard count communities, were really targeted and really engaged. So I just want to give you a big
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I appreciate your work.
Thank you. One question, Ms. Lopez, could you provide your remarks to Mr. Stewart so we have those for the record? I think it's really important that we all have that information so that we don't let it get past us. So if you could send that over to him, that would be really appreciated. Again, thank you so much. Any other questions from committee members or comments? Okay, we will go on to Catherine Bartlett from the Governor's Finance Office.
Thank you. Catherine Bartlett for the record. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if you see an Excel spreadsheet with the 2020 census expenditures.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
So I'm going to give you just a high-level overview of the general areas where the census money has been expended thus far. We've split it out by fiscal year, so you can see most of the funding was spent in fiscal year 20. And then as things are starting to wind down in fiscal year 21, you see a large decrease. So there's been a total of approximately 1.8 million spent to date. We are projecting another 32,000 to be spent for the final contract for texting outreach and then the census website as we wind that down, and we will eventually take that completely down. About 590,000 was spent on contracted staff and associated costs. Those costs would include email and phone and certain supplies. We hired a total of 40 positions, including the statewide coordinator, regional coordinators, digital coordinator, organizers, administrative support, and demographer support. 34,000 was spent on travel for contracted staff. We spent 14,000 on laptops and hotspots and other type of technological items to help the contracted staff. After the projected expenditures, we'll have approximately 128,000 that will be spent on promotional items, swag, events, and other outreach opportunities. 20,228 was issued in grants to 4 entities. And they use the funding for mailing out marketing materials, texting, and mass messaging, as well as swag. As Ms. Lopez presented, several of these grants were not able to be issued to the awarding agencies due to COVID-19 and the shutdown of various businesses and events. And then after projected expenditures, we expect to spend approximately $62,000 on the census website, and that included building it, developing, editing along the way. And finally, we spent a total of $979,000 on the media and marketing contract with the Ferraro Group for the various types of media and marketing outreach, such as radio, TV, all across the state. So that is the high-level overview of where the money has been spent, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from committee members on Ms. Bartlett's report? I don't see any, so thank you so much. And I do want to extend our appreciation to Ms. Lopez and to Ms. Bartlett in having to readjust our agenda today a little bit. And I know that we ended up pushing you towards the end of the agenda. So we appreciate you sticking around and making your reports. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that will be the end of that agenda item. And we have a bit of a procedural announcement to make before we move on to agenda item number 7. And this is regarding our second public comment. So for those who are listening and wish to make public comment today, under the second public comment at the end of the meeting, we advise you now to begin that process of calling in and getting in the queue. And just a reminder of the call-in numbers, 669-900-6833. And then your reference meeting ID number is 927-0242-6353, followed by the pound sign. And then we're going to move on to agenda item number 7, which is an update on redistricting software and hardware and GIS staff for the 2021 reapportionment and redistricting cycle. And we will welcome back Ms. Haley Prohl. And you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Haley Prohl, GIS analyst and redistricting GIS specialist. So I'm going to give a very brief update on the redistricting software, accompanying hardware, and the GIS staff hiring for the 2021 redistricting cycle. During the second meeting of this committee in May, the purchase of redistricting software and hardware and the hiring of 4 session hire GIS technicians to support each legislative caucus were discussed and approved. So the following is an update of each area, including estimated hardware delivery dates, software arrival and support dates, and session GIS technician start dates and working environments. So starting with the redistricting software, Autobound Edge redistricting software has been ordered through Citygate GIS. The licenses and 1 year of technical support and maintenance begins on November 2nd, 2020. This date allows staff enough time to become skillful using the software prior to session and redistricting, and hopefully allows adequate time post the legislative session if the redistricting data is not delivered by the Census Bureau during the 81st session timeline. Soon after the software is available, staff will work with the Nevada System of Higher Education to install their license and train their staff to enable them to work on Board of Regents redistricting plans. For the redistricting hardware, workstations, laptops, and monitors for the 2 public workstations and the 4 GIS technicians will be ordered from Dell early next week. And again, 1 public workstation will be set up in Carson City and 1 will be set up in Las Vegas. Orders are normally received in 1 to 3 weeks' time. So the hardware should be in-house before December. Printers have been difficult to find in stock, and we are hoping to have them sometime in November. The GIS technician job announcement was posted at the beginning of October and will close early November. As of today, we have received 10 applications. Almost all have some GIS experience, and most of them look to be well qualified. We expect interviews to start on November 9th, 2020. And the projected start date for the technicians is on or around December 7th, 2020. And as far as their working environment, prior to the start of session in February, if needed, the GIS technicians could possibly work from home, learning the redistricting software, and reviewing various redistricting processes. The research division also has an open area in the legislative building where technicians can be located temporarily until each caucus leadership decides where they would like to locate their respective technician. So we did postpone purchasing the software and hardware and starting the hiring process for the technicians as late in the year as we could, but we decided to start the process on everything to be prepared in the event that we do get the redistricting data by the original deadline of March 30th, 2021. And so that's about it for me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments from committee members? Everyone is very quiet today. I don't see any. So thank you, Ms. Prohl. I know that you all have a big job on your hands. Certainly appreciate all the work that you're going through in getting the hardware, the software, the technicians on board so that we'll be ready to roll when it is time to do all that. So again, thank you for all of your hard work on this. Next, we're going to agenda item number 11, which is public comments. And we've asked our individuals who wish to come in under public comment to have moved and made those contacts via phone. But I'll just read out the numbers again. 669-900-6833. And then the meeting ID number is 927-0242-6353, followed by the pound sign. So we're going to take a short break, couple of minutes, and don't want members to go very far. And as soon as we have speakers in the queue, we will continue with public comment. So let's just take a short break, 2 minutes. So let's check in with our wonderful broadcast and production services staff and see if we have anyone in the queue for public comment this afternoon. And we just want to remember, for those of you speaking, to clearly state and spell your name. And we will go to BPS now to see if we have anyone in the queue.
Hello, Madam Chair. The public comment line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we'll close public comments and we'll move to agenda item number 12. Members, before we adjourn this meeting, do any of you have comments before that adjournment announcement is made? Okay, seeing none, since there is no further business today to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you all so very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you, staff, Mr. Stewart and all of the presenters, and certainly our rest of our LCB staff that assist in legal and our broadcast and production services. You all are magnificent. So we appreciate you. Thank you. And we're adjourned. Bye.